My name is David Solano Corso, and on January 2nd of this year one lived an experience that transformed my life forever. God in His infinite mercy granted me a revelation so shocking that even today when I remember it my spirit shudders, as if I had been torn from the daily routine and taken to an unknown dimension. I witnessed something that deeply marked my faith and my walk on earth. I can do nothing but share it with you with the hope that each word serves as a call to reflection, an invitation to examine how we are living before the eyes of God. If at this moment someone were to ask me who among us longs to be in the presence of the Lord, I do not doubt that the answer would be unanimous. We all wish to reach heaven, to live with Christ, to contemplate His glory and enjoy His eternal peace. However, there is a divine order, a process established in the Scriptures to enter the kingdom of God. Nothing in His plan is arbitrary or left to chance because He is the Creator and the author of life in the world. The aftermath of the rapture, I saw myself walking down a path. My destination was the house of an acquaintance whom I wanted to visit for a particular reason. I knew exactly where he lived and I was heading there with determination. When I arrived my eyes fell on the facade of the house, an imposing place of luxury with an elegant design that reflected prosperity and stability. I approached the door. I discovered something unexpected. The door was not locked or secured but slightly ajar. I pushed the door and it opened without resistance, allowing me to see the interior. What I found left me breathless. In place of elegance and order that the facade promised before my eyes, it was a desolate scene. There were piles of garbage scattered everywhere, old mattresses piled, dust covering every corner. Everything in the house, it was ruin and desolation. The structure lacked a roof as if time and abandonment had consumed it. I observed with disbelief. How is it possible that this house is in this condition? I asked myself with perplexity without finding answer. I decided to continue forward. I advanced along the same street leaving behind that image of decay and confusion. A few meters on the other side of the street a second house caught my attention. It was even more imposing than the previous one with a magnificent structure, a design that evoked the great colonial buildings. Its presence was overwhelming. As I approached I felt a sensation in my being strange, a presence that shook me. It was not a simple concern, it was something deeper, a powerful and dark impact that oppressed my chest. I did not understand what was happening but I knew that something was happening. Suddenly a shuddering rumble shook the environment. A violent blow resounded against the gate of that imposing house, interrupting the silence of the dense atmosphere that surrounded me. I felt a jolt in the depths of my being. It was as if the air itself had been charged with a dark and oppressive energy. I was paralyzed for a moment trying to understand what it was that had just happened. My first thought was that behind that door there must be a wild animal, perhaps a dog of large size and ferocious temperament. I could not find another explanation for the intensity of the blow. In an attempt to calm down I told myself that I had to move away quickly and avoid any confrontation with whatever was on the other side of that threshold. However, a strange uneasiness ran through me. Something inside me told me that it was not simply an animal. I began to walk with hurry, quickening my pace, not daring to run but moving as fast as possible. I advanced about 10 meters with my heart beating hard, when a new knock shook the door, this time with greater violence. The metallic sound reverberated in the environment as if something enormous was trying to force its way out. It was impossible that a single being was causing such a commotion. The gate of that house was made of solid metal, tall and imposing. However, it shook with each impact. It was then that I understood that what was on the other side was not a simple animal, something much more powerful, something terrifying. I was trying to get out. Fear took over me, but before I could react, the gate swung open. What came out from took my breath away. They were not dogs, they were not common creatures of this world. Two enormous beings emerged with fury, shaking the air with their imposing presence. They were dragons. Not common dragons but giant snakes with outstretched wings, colossal creatures that breathed fire from their jaws. One was bigger than the other but both radiated an indescribable evil power. My skin crawled when I heard an even more terrifying sound. Those beings spoke. Their voices were human but loaded with contempt and evil with fury. They began to curse me, to hurl insults at me with a voice that resonated like thunder in the dense atmosphere. The largest of them, with flaming eyes and sharp claws, turned to me with a voice that shook the blood. "I am going to finish you off. I have followed you for so long, and today your end has finally come. I believed that destroying you would be easy, but you have cost me more than I imagined." Each word was like a blow directly to my spirit. He told me that for years they had tried to bring me down, and that many of his own had fallen in the attempt to make me succumb. He accused me of taking many lives from him, of leading others down a different path. From his fury was uncontrollable, and in his voice you could perceive the desperation of not having achieved his purpose before today. "You have no escape," he continued. "There is no exit, there is no refuge, there is nowhere to run." I felt the impotence take hold of me, but at the same time a force greater than my fear woke up inside me. In the moments of greatest despair the human being clings to life with all his strength, and that instinct drove me to react. I was not going to stay there waiting for my destruction without thinking. I turned around and began to run with all my strength. My feet pounded the ground in desperation while my mind clung to a single truth: only God could save me. Between gasps I cried out with fervor, "The blood of Jesus Christ has power." As I ran, my voice rose in prayer, reciting Psalm 91 and Psalm 23 with all the faith in my being, crying out for protection. The dragons were quick to react with a deafening roar. They spread their wings and rose into the air, launching themselves after me. The flames that came out of their mouths tore through the atmosphere with an infernal intensity. I felt the scorching heat behind me as I desperately dodged the torrents of fire that fell around me. I moved in a zigzag pattern, trying to avoid the flames that crashed against the ground with terrifying speed. Just a few centimeters from me the chase intensified and my resistance began to weaken. I knew I couldn't run forever. I ran with all my strength, but there came a point where my legs couldn't go on. Exhaustion took over me, draining every ounce of energy I still had. I knew I couldn't go on, that my body had reached its limit. There was no escape, not a single place to run. I could do nothing else. I stopped my march, breathing with difficulty. I did not look back. I did not want to see what was approaching, what was about to reach me. I simply closed my eyes, and with the last hope I had left I raised my cry to heaven: "Lord, in your hands rest my soul and my spirit. Have mercy on me." I barely pronounced those words. Something happened. I felt a firm pressure on my left shoulder, as if a gigantic hand had taken me with authority. That presence was imposing but did not transmit fear, but an indescribable force. At that moment, even with my eyes closed, I experienced a sensation impossible to explain with words. It was as if my entire body had been lifted from the earth at a dizzying speed. I opened my eyes, surprised by what was happening. The first thing I saw was that hand that held me. Its size was colossal. It covered my shoulder and part of my arm with a firmness that did not hurt, but that he demonstrated absolute power. I looked up and contemplated the being who was carrying me. He was a character of impressive stature, approximately 10 meters tall. He dressed with indescribable elegance. He had an impeccable suit and a majestic bearing. His expression was serious and fixed. At a point that I could not see, he did not look at me even once. He did not say a word, but his presence radiated an authority that surpassed any human understanding. We were traveling at an enormous speed. I could not calculate how many kilometers per hour, yet seconds ago I was trapped, surrounded by those infernal creatures. What I saw left me speechless. The dragons were still there, furious, moving from one side to the other like caged beasts. Their eyes burned with rage as they looked up to where I was ascending, but there was something that held them back. There seemed to be an invisible barrier that prevented them from following me. Their flapping was desperate, their anger evident, but as much as they tried and could not cross the limit that separated us. In that instant I understood that I had been rescued, that the authority of the one who held me was unquestionable, and that those creatures had no power to surpass it. While we continued ascending at an unimaginable speed, something new began to fill the air. At first it was just a distant murmur, but little by little it gained strength. It was a chant. A heavenly melody filled the air with harmonies that I had never heard on earth. It was not a solitary voice, but a chorus of multitudes, an endless number of voices singing with joy and solemnity a glorious song, which goes as follow. I'm on my way to the big city, where there are streets of gold and a sea of crystal." The melody was repeated but with a slight variation. "We're on our way to the big city where there are streets of gold and a sea of crystal." That chant penetrated the deepest part of my being. Each word had an eternal weight in absolute truth. I understood at that moment that my destiny was not uncertain, that I was being led to a glorious place. There was no fear, there was no anguish, only an indescribable peace and the certainty that I was on the right path, on the path to the eternal home. I felt an indescribable joy. Everything inside me vibrated with the longing to reach that glorious destiny. There was no doubt we were going towards heaven, towards the home of God. A thought crossed my mind intensely: I have to talk to him, I have to ask him so many things. For a moment my heart filled with emotion, and almost without being able to contain myself I asked myself if my wife knew where I am at this moment, if she could see what I am seeing, if she could hear what I hear. It was something so great, so real, that it was still difficult for me to assimilate it. For years I had cried out, I had longed for God to allow me to see heaven again, but I never thought that this wish would come true in such an extraordinary way. We continued traveling, and with each second my illusion grew. I was convinced that soon I would see that glorious city again, the place that God had already shown me in the past. My soul was filled with joy just imagining it. But in the depths of my heart there was a question that burned intensely, a concern that I could not ignore. What should I do to defeat that dragon? That it was the most urgent reason for my encounter with the Lord was not only about seeing the glory of His presence, but about finding answers. I needed to know how to face the struggles that surrounded me, the spiritual problems, the family conflicts and the marital difficulties, the moral battles that so often tried to weaken my faith. I knew that Christ had the answer, that only He could give me the direction that I needed, and my deepest desire was to present this supplication and receive His word. I could not calculate how long we had traveled, but at some point the panorama began to change. We left behind the immensity of the space that surrounded us, and little by little the atmosphere became different.